I never thought living in a quiet neighborhood would feel like stepping into a battlefield. I pictured lazy mornings, coffee on the porch, neighbors waving politely as kids rode bikes down the street. I pictured peace. I pictured normal, but I was so wrong. It all started with a letter. Not the kind you toss in the trash, not the kind that makes you smile or shrug, but a thick, intimidating stack of paper from the HOA. When I saw the bold letters on the envelope, notice of disrespect and violation of community, stomach sank. Disrespect? Me? What had I done? I hadn't even waved at anyone this week. Was that a crime? I opened it and the words seemed to jump off the page, almost laughing at me. Your behavior has demonstrated a lack of respect toward the community and its residents. I stared at it like my eyes were broken. Respect. I paid my dues, mowed my lawn, and tried not to be the person people avoid at block parties. And now, somehow, I had committed the most heinous offense known to suburban society. Disrespect. At first, I tried to laugh it off. Maybe the HOA was joking, maybe this was some weird prank. But then I read further. Fines, threats of legal action, warnings that if I didn't attend a respect meeting, my privileges would be revoked. Privileges, my privileges, I almost laughed out loud. Were they going to take my right to own a mailbox next? I tried reasoning with myself. Maybe I had accidentally left my trash cans out 1 hour too long. Maybe my mailbox wasn't perfectly aligned to the North Star. Maybe my garden gnome had a smirk they found offensive. It all sounded ridiculous, and yet there it was. My quiet life suddenly hijacked by rules I didn't even know existed. I folded the letter and put it on the counter, hoping ignoring it would make it disappear. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Because the next morning when I stepped outside, I was hit with a sight that made my heart stop. My road, our only way in and out, was blocked. Barricades, cones, and a massive, intimidating sign reading private road, no trespassing, now stood where my driveway had been. I blinked, thinking maybe I had dreamt it. I pinched myself. Nope. Reality was worse than any nightmare. Someone, no, some group, had decided I was too disrespectful to leave my own home. I honked, I waved. I tried yelling through the cones. Nothing. The HOA reps, 2 of them clipboard in hand, smiling like smug villains in a cartoon, stood silently, daring me to challenge them. And that's when I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just bureaucracy gone wild. This was a trap. A suburban ambush designed to humiliate me and make me apologize for crimes I didn't even know I had committed. I felt my chest tighten. My hands shook a little, not from fear, but from disbelief. How had my life come to this? How could a few people with clipboards and too much authority think they could block my road and ruin my day? The unfairness of it all made my blood boil, and yet I couldn't help but feel a little powerless. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He was a retired Marine, a man who had stared danger in the face and never flinched, a man whose mere presence could make grown men nervous. I needed backup, and I needed it fast. When he answered, I tried to explain without sounding pathetic. Dad, I think the HOA is trying to trap me. They blocked the road. They're serious. I don't know what to do. There was a pause on the other end, and then he chuckled, a low, confident chuckle that immediately made me feel safer. They blocked the road, he said. All right, kid, don't panic, I'll be there, and trust me, they picked the wrong family to mess with. That laugh, that calm voice, it gave me a spark of hope. Maybe all wasn't lost. Maybe we could handle this. Maybe the HOA had no idea what was coming. But as I hung up the phone, staring at the barricades that now felt like prison bars, I knew one thing for sure. Life in this neighborhood would never be normal again. Not while the HOA thought they could dictate respect like it was currency. And not while my Marine dad was on his way. Something big was about to happen, and I had a feeling the next few hours were going to change everything. The morning air felt heavier than usual as I stepped outside, coffee cup in hand, trying to convince myself I was just overreacting. But no, there it was, the barricade, tall, ugly, and mocking. My road, the only way out of my house, was blocked. And it wasn't temporary. Whoever did this made it perfectly clear I wasn't going anywhere. I froze. For a moment I just stared, hoping maybe somehow it was a mistake. Maybe the HOA had sent someone to fix a pothole and this was just an over-the-top construction sign. But no, the orange cones, the metal barricades, the huge private road, no trespassing sign, they were all too deliberate. And then I saw them, two HOA members standing there like statues with clipboards. They weren't moving. They weren't even blinking. It was almost scary. I swallowed hard and tried to laugh. Okay, I muttered to myself. This is funny. They can't actually stop me from leaving. I honked nothing. I waved. They didn't flinch. I even stepped closer, raising my hands in surrender, trying to talk sense. Look, I just need to leave, please. I didn't do anything. The taller one, clipboard in hand, finally spoke, voice dripping with authority. You are currently in violation of community respect guidelines. Until a meeting is held, you are required to remain on your property. I blinked. I couldn't believe my ears. Remain on my property? Trapped. For disrespect. My heart started pounding. The absurdity of it all hit me like a punch to the chest. But it wasn't funny. Not really. I had bills, work, errands, a life. And now, apparently, I was being detained for something I didn't even understand. I felt panic rising, that raw, hollow kind that makes your stomach twist and your hands tremble. I tried to think rationally. Maybe if I called the HOA office, they'd see reason. Maybe they'd realize that blocking an entire road was, I don't know, illegal. I pulled out my phone, fingers shaking, and dialed. Ring, ring, nothing. The line went to voicemail. I left a message, trying to sound calm, rational, even polite. Hello, yes, I believe there's been a mistake. My road is blocked and I can't leave. I need someone to... Click. Call ended. No response. I sank onto my porch, feeling utterly trapped, staring at the barricade like it was some living monster. My brain raced. What if they had the police on their side? What if this escalated into something worse? That's when I remembered my dad. My Marine dad. A man who had stared down impossible odds, a man who could calm a hurricane with nothing but his stare and a few words. I grabbed my phone and called him, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound strong. Dad, they blocked the road. There, I can't get out. There was silence on the other end, and then I heard the chuckle. That low, confident, almost dangerous laugh I've always known meant something big was about to happen. They blocked the road, he said. All right, don't move, don't do anything stupid. I'll be there in 20 minutes, and trust me, they have no idea who they're dealing with. Even through the phone, I could feel his presence, like a shield had been wrapped around me. My panic eased, replaced by a strange mix of hope and anticipation. He always knew how to handle impossible situations. Always. Minutes passed, each second stretching endlessly. I kept staring at the barricades, willing the HOA members to blink, to move, to show even the tiniest crack in their armor. But they didn't. They just stood there like statues, pens poised over clipboards, ready to record my every breath, my every frown, my every movement like I was some criminal. Then I noticed something. Their smiles weren't smug anymore. They were nervous, confused, almost scared. My dad's words replayed in my head. They have no idea who they're dealing with. And suddenly I wasn't just trapped anymore. I was part of something bigger, something I didn't fully understand yet, but I knew it was about to tip in my favor. I paced back and forth, trying to act casual, trying to think of a plan. I considered yelling for neighbors, calling the city, maybe even trying to squeeze around the cones, but every option seemed risky. And then I realized something important. I didn't have to do this alone. Dad was coming. And if he was anything like I remembered, the next few hours were going to be unforgettable. The barricades didn't feel quite so ominous now. They were obstacles, yes, but they were obstacles that were about to be challenged. And deep down, I felt a flicker of excitement, the kind you only feel when a storm is coming and you know you're about to stand right in the middle of it. I sat back down on the porch, heart racing, waiting, watching, hopping, waiting for my Marine dad to arrive. Waiting to see just how far the HOA would go before reality caught up with them. Waiting to find out if the people who thought they could trap me had made the biggest mistake of their lives. And just like that, my quiet suburban morning turned into a countdown. 20 minutes. One Marine, one stubborn kid, and a barricade that had no idea what was coming. The sound of tires crunching over gravel made me jump. My heart, which had been pounding like a drum since I saw the barricade, suddenly skipped a beat. I turned, half expecting a miracle, half expecting disaster. And then I saw him, my dad. There's no subtle way to describe a retired Marine walking into a situation like this. He didn't run. He didn't wave nervously. He walked with the kind of calm authority that makes people rethink their entire existence. Combat boots hitting the pavement, hands resting casually on his belt, eyes scanning the barricade like a predator sizing up its prey. He looked at me, raised an eyebrow, and said almost teasingly, "So, this is what they've done to you." I tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled mix of nervousness and relief. "They blocked my road. They're serious, Dad. I don't know what to do." He studied the barricades for a long moment, silence stretching like a rope pulling tight around me. Then he smiled, a small, confident, slightly dangerous smile. "Relax, they made a mistake, a big mistake, and mistakes like this, well, we have a way of fixing them." I had never seen my dad like this before. The calm, the certainty, the authority, it was intoxicating. I felt my panic ease replaced by a strange mixture of awe and anticipation. Whatever was about to happen, I knew one thing: the HOA had no idea what they had unleashed. He stepped forward and the two HOA members immediately straightened up, pens poised over clipboards. Their eyes, which had been smug all morning, widened slightly as they took in his presence. The taller one whispered something to the shorter one, but it was too quiet for me to hear. The effect, though, was undeniable. Suddenly, their confidence wavered. They weren't sure if they were dealing with a concerned parent or a tactical genius. "Good morning," Dad said, his voice calm, almost conversational, but carrying a weight that made the air feel thicker. "I understand there's been some misunderstanding about respect. Care to explain exactly what happened here?" Karen, yes, Karen, the self-appointed guardian of suburban morality, pushed her sunglasses up her nose and cleared her throat. "Your child has demonstrated repeated disrespect toward the community guidelines. Until a formal meeting is held, you are required to remain on your property." Dad blinked slowly like he was humoring a child. "Required to remain? By whom? And exactly what authority allows you to block a public road?" The words hung in the air. I could see their minds working frantically behind their forced smiles. Nobody had ever talked to them like this. They were used to fear. Fear from neighbors, fear from mild-mannered homeowners who said nothing. But fear wasn't on the table today. My dad didn't bring fear. He brought clarity, logic, and a kind of calm that made you wonder if arguing was even an option. I could barely breathe. Part of me was terrified. This was the HOA after all, but part of me couldn't help grinning. I had never seen my dad in full Marine mode, and it was mesmerizing. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't threatening. He was simply stating facts, exposing absurdity, and standing tall. Then, as if on cue, a nervous neighbor peeked over a fence, muttering under their breath about what a spectacle this was turning into. Dad didn't even glance at them. Instead, he focused on Karen and her clipboard army. "Look," he said quietly but firmly, "rules are important. Respect is important, but blocking a road to enforce respect, that's not respect, that's intimidation. And intimidation is not how you run a community, it's how you make enemies. And trust me," he glanced at me, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth, "I know a little about enemies." Their faces tightened. Pens hovered over clipboards. I could feel the suspense like static in the air. Something was about to happen, I could feel it, but I didn't know what. Dad's presence alone was enough to make the HOA hesitate, rethink, second-guess every action they had taken this morning. I realized something important as I watched this unfold. Courage isn't loud, it isn't angry, it isn't even obvious. Courage is quiet, it's precise. It's the ability to stand tall when everyone else thinks you should bow. And right now, my dad was courage incarnate. And then came the moment that made my stomach flip. Dad slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out the HOA rulebook, and began flipping through it like a Marine scanning intelligence reports before a mission. He read passages aloud, pointing out contradictions, absurdities, and loopholes that none of them had noticed. The tension was electric. Every word he spoke chipped away at their smug confidence, replacing it with uncertainty. I could hardly believe it. My dad, calm and commanding, standing in front of a barricade that had seemed impossible just an hour ago, dismantling it piece by piece, mentally, legally, morally. And in that moment I realized we were no longer trapped, not really. We were about to turn the tables, and whatever happened next, the HOA would never forget it. My dad's eyes never left the barricade, but his presence alone made it feel like the air had thickened. I stayed behind him, heart hammering, knowing that whatever happened next could either end this nightmare or make it so much worse. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, stepped forward, clipboard held like a shield. "You can't just ignore the rules," she said, voice sharp, trying to command authority over someone who clearly didn't care about her authority. Dad didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, a smirk playing on his lips. "I'm not ignoring the rules," he said calmly. "I'm simply pointing out that your rules don't give you the right to trap someone in their own home. That's called harassment, and trust me," he glanced at me, "you don't want to escalate that." Karen's nostrils flared. "We are the HOA. We uphold respect, order, and community guidelines. You will comply." "Comply?" Dad raised a single eyebrow, his tone measured, almost soothing. "Let me get this straight. You think blocking a road, scaring a resident, and calling them disrespectful is enforcing respect?" Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her clipboard shook slightly in her hands, betraying the cracks in her confidence. The other HOA member muttered something under his breath, something defensive, but Dad ignored it. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, the kind of step that makes you realize this isn't about yelling or threats. It's about presence, authority, experience. "Respect is earned through action, not fear," he said, eyes locking on each of them in turn. "What you're doing here isn't respect, it's intimidation, and intimidation breeds resentment. You think you're controlling me? No, you're creating a problem you have no idea how to fix." I could feel the tension vibrating through me. The air felt charged like static before a storm. I wanted to say something, to add my voice, but I couldn't find the words. My dad's calm, measured power filled the space, commanding attention without raising his voice. Then he did something that made my stomach twist with both fear and pride. He pulled out his phone and held it casually, as if recording wasn't even a thought. "This," he said, pointing to the barricade, "is evidence. Every threat you've made, every rule you've twisted to trap me, recorded. And every single violation of law you've committed while trying to enforce, what? Fear. I'll make sure it's addressed properly." Karen's face turned pale. The smaller HOA member fumbled with his pen. I could feel their panic growing with each passing second. And I realized something important. My dad wasn't just standing up for me. He was exposing their absurdity, stripping away the illusion of power they had been hiding behind all morning. I took a deep breath, letting the suspense sink in. Every second dragged, but it was electric. The HOA members had gone from smug confidence to hesitant uncertainty in less than 5 minutes, and my dad hadn't even raised his voice yet. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Dad, still calm, leaned on the barricade slightly, his hands firm on the metal. "You need to understand something," he said softly, almost conversationally. "This road belongs to the residents, not to the people who think clipboards make them rulers. You're not enforcing respect, you're abusing authority, and I assure you," he looked directly at Karen, voice dropping just a fraction, "that abuse has consequences." For a split second, I thought I saw fear in her eyes. Not the "I'm mad at a neighbor" kind of fear, but the kind that comes when someone finally realizes they've underestimated their opponent. I wanted to cheer, I wanted to yell, but I stayed quiet, feeling my heart pounding in my chest as my dad calmly dismantled every ounce of their confidence. It was like watching a master at work. Each word, each movement, each pointed glance was calculated, precise, perfect. And then Karen, the mighty queen of the HOA, took a step back. I could see the uncertainty in her posture, the tiny tremble in her hands. The other member glanced at her nervously, and for the first time all morning, they weren't the ones in control. I swallowed hard. The suspense was unbearable. The barricade, which had seemed like a wall, a trap, an impossible obstacle just an hour ago, suddenly felt fragile, like it could crumble at any second. And I knew, deep down, the tide was about to turn. Something bigger was coming. I didn't know exactly what yet, but I felt it in my chest. The HOA thought they were in charge. They were about to find out. They had no idea who they were messing with. And as I watched my dad, calm and commanding, standing before them like a force of nature, I realized one thing. This was no longer just about a blocked road. This was about showing them that respect can't be demanded. It has to be earned. And that lesson, it was about to be unforgettable. I thought my dad's calm authority would end the battle. I thought maybe, just maybe, the HOA would blink, retreat, and the barricades would come down. I was wrong. Dead wrong. As soon as I started to relax, I saw it, the shift in their expression. Karen and her minion weren't defeated, they were scheming. I could feel it in the air, a tension that made my stomach twist. Their smug confidence was replaced with something darker, more determined. They weren't giving up. They were escalating. Minutes later, a loud knock at the gate startled me. A city officer, uniformed, clipboard in hand, looked at me like I'd committed a felony. Karen's smug smile was back, triumphant. "See, we've got law enforcement here," she said, voice dripping with authority. "You still cannot leave until we resolve this matter." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to shake the barricade down with my bare hands. But my dad just stood behind me, calm as ever, hands folded, eyes never leaving the officer. I felt the tension in my chest tighten. This wasn't just a petty neighborhood feud anymore. It was spiraling into something much bigger. The officer cleared his throat. "We've had complaints about potential violations of HOA rules regarding disrespect." His words trailed off, uncertain. I realized immediately he didn't understand the absurdity he was witnessing, and neither did the HOA. Dad stepped forward, voice low, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. "Officer," he said, "you are standing here in the middle of a public right-of-way. These barricades are not legally enforceable, and everything you've been told by this HOA," he glanced at Karen almost pityingly, "is a misinterpretation of the law. I suggest you leave before you become part of the problem." The officer blinked, hesitated. I could feel the suspense like a tight wire stretched across the street, ready to snap. Karen's face went pale. She realized she might have brought in the wrong kind of authority. My dad had the calm certainty of a man who had seen worse than a blocked road and an overzealous HOA. Then came the next escalation. From somewhere behind the barricades, I heard a shout. "Fines, legal action, this family must comply." Karen's voice rang sharp, almost desperate now. Her fingers tightened on the clipboard like she was trying to hold onto control she no longer had. I swallowed hard. My chest felt tight. My palms were sweaty, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from my dad. Every syllable he spoke, every movement he made, disarmed them further. I realized something in that moment. The HOA thought they were in charge, but they weren't ready for someone who understood rules better than they did. Someone who could wield logic like a weapon. Dad didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply pointed out their absurdities, their contradictions, their overreach. He used their own rule book against them. "You block a road because you feel disrespected?" he asked, voice calm like discussing the weather. "And you think that's lawful? That's not respect. That's abuse of authority. And if you don't stop, you're not only breaking the law, you're setting yourself up for consequences you clearly don't understand." Karen's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. The smaller HOA member fumbled with his pen, whispering nervously. I could practically see their confidence crumbling in real time. And I felt it too, a mix of awe, relief, and pure adrenaline. But just when I thought they might back down, Karen pulled her ultimate weapon, the threat of escalation. "We will take this to court. You'll pay thousands in fines. You will regret defying the HOA." I could feel my jaw tighten. Fear prickled at the back of my neck, but then Dad smiled slowly, deliberately. It was the kind of smile that made you realize he had a plan no one else could see. "Court, fines, please. You clearly don't understand who you're dealing with. I suggest you reconsider before things get complicated." That word, complicated, hung in the air like a storm warning. I felt suspense clawing at my chest. Something was about to happen, something they would never expect. Dad had baited them into overreaching, and overreach is always dangerous, especially when you're dealing with a retired Marine who knows exactly how to turn the tables. I couldn't tear my eyes away. I didn't want to. My heart raced with anticipation and fear. The barricade no longer felt like a prison. It felt like the battlefield before the first strike. And I knew deep down that the next move, our move, was going to change everything. The HOA had escalated. They had threatened fines, called law enforcement, and doubled down on their arrogance. But they didn't realize they had already fallen into the trap. My dad's mind was working faster than any of us could see. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty: we weren't finished, not by a long shot. The calm before the storm had arrived. And when the storm hit, the HOA would wish they had never tried to trap me. I felt my pulse in my ears as I watched my dad stand in front of the barricade, calm and collected like he was reading a morning newspaper instead of facing an HOA that had just tried to trap me. The air was thick with tension. Corinne's clipboard hands trembled slightly, and I realized she had no idea what was about to happen. Dad took a slow step forward, surveying the barricade and the street beyond like a general studying a battlefield. "All right," he said quietly, almost conversationally. "Let's see how this works according to your own rules." I tilted my head, confused. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer me directly. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out the HOA rulebook, and began flipping through it with methodical precision. I couldn't follow all the details, but I could see it. He was using their own words against them. Every threat, every fine, every arbitrary restriction was being challenged with their own rules and city ordinances. I felt my stomach tighten with suspense. It was like watching someone play chess blindfolded and winning every move. Each time he read a passage aloud, Corinne's eyes widened. The smaller HOA member muttered nervously under his breath. They had built this barricade thinking they were in control, but control, I realized, was slipping through their fingers faster than they could comprehend. Then he spoke again, calm but firm. "You cannot block a public right-of-way under any circumstance without city approval, and since you have not applied for any permits, congratulations. You are in violation." Corinne's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. I could see panic flicker across her face. This wasn't going the way she expected. She wasn't used to someone calmly pointing out every hole in her plan, every overreach, every absurdity. Dad smiled faintly. "Now you have two choices," he said. "You remove this barricade voluntarily and avoid further complications, or you insist on enforcing your interpretation of respect. And then, well..." He didn't finish the sentence, but I didn't need him to. The implication hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. I took a deep breath, adrenaline surging through me. Every second felt electric, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, just watched as my dad, calm and unstoppable, dismantled their authority piece by piece. Then came the masterstroke. Dad walked up to the barricade, clipboard in hand, and pointed to a specific rule. "According to Section 4, subsection B," he said slowly, emphasizing every word, "residents have the right to unimpeded access to their property. Your actions are in direct violation of your own bylaws. Therefore," he paused, letting the suspense build, "this barricade must be removed immediately." Corinne's face went pale. I swear I saw her lips quiver. The smaller HOA member looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. The tension was unbearable. I felt my knees shake slightly, but not from fear, from anticipation, from knowing that we were seconds away from victory. And then it happened. Corinne barked orders at the smaller member and they started fumbling with the barricade. Orange cones toppled, metal poles rattled. It wasn't violent, but it was slow, like watching a dam crack under immense pressure. My dad didn't move. He simply watched, calm and confident, like he had already predicted every step. I could barely breathe as I stepped closer, heart racing. The barricade that had seemed impossible just hours ago was coming down, piece by piece, under the weight of logic, patience, and one Marine dad's tactical brilliance. Every plank removed, every cone lifted, felt like a small victory, a moment of justice in a world gone absurd. And then the road was clear, completely clear, open, free. The barricade that had trapped me, terrified me, and made me question everything about this neighborhood was gone. I turned to my dad, awe and gratitude overwhelming me. He just smiled, that faint, dangerous smile, the one that made me realize he had already anticipated their next move. "See," he said almost casually. "Patience, observation, strategy. Never underestimate the power of knowledge or a Marine." I laughed, partly in relief, partly in disbelief. The HOA had tried to intimidate us. They had threatened fines, legal action, even called the city. And yet here we were, standing victorious, the road open, their smug confidence replaced with silence and shock. I realized then that this was more than just a blocked road. It was a lesson in courage, in patience, and in standing up for yourself when the rules make no sense. And as I looked at my dad, calm and commanding, I felt a sense of pride and excitement I'd never felt before. The storm wasn't over. I could feel the tension still lingering. Karen and her clipboard army weren't finished. They'd regroup, they'd escalate again. But for now, we had won. And I knew deep down the next chapter was going to be even more intense. Because in this neighborhood, respect wasn't given. It had to be earned. And we had just shown exactly how it was done. By the time the barricade was gone, I thought we'd won. I thought the worst was behind us. But standing there watching Karen glare at my dad with pure disbelief, I realized this wasn't over, not even close. Karen straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and spoke with the kind of authority only someone completely deluded could muster. "You think this ends here? You've challenged the HOA, disrespected its authority, and now," she paused, as if the words alone were supposed to intimidate me, "you'll face consequences that go beyond this street." I could feel my pulse in my throat, fear mixed with adrenaline in a cocktail that made me almost dizzy. But my dad didn't flinch, not once. He just took a slow, deliberate step forward, his presence radiating calm, calculated power. "You've made threats," he said softly, almost conversationally. "You've blocked roads, you've tried intimidation, and now you claim consequences. Let me make this very simple. The only consequence here is you learning a lesson in humility." Karen's eyes widened, lips trembling slightly. The smaller HOA member shuffled his feet like he was trying to shrink into the ground. The tension in the air was so thick I could practically feel it pressing against my chest. Every neighbor peeking from behind curtains or fences felt it too. It wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a spectacle, a battle of wills. Then my dad did something that made my stomach flip. He stepped closer to the edge of the road, hands open, palms up like he was inviting the storm to strike. "I gave you every chance to do the right thing. The barricade is gone. The law is clear. But if you insist on continuing this, well," his voice dropped slightly, cold but calm, "you're choosing to escalate a fight you cannot win." Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. The suspense was unbearable. Every second stretched like hours. I could feel every heartbeat echoing in my chest. I wanted to speak, to say something to help, but I stayed silent, watching as my dad dismantled her authority without a single raised voice. Then came the final move, the one that would tip everything in our favor. Dad slowly reached into his pocket again, pulling out a printed copy of the HOA bylaws, city ordinances, and even obscure clauses nobody reads. He held them up like weapons. "Let's review," he said, voice calm but deadly. "According to Section 7, subsection C, a resident's right of access cannot be restricted without proper notice and legal authorization. According to City Code 214B, blocking a road without a permit is punishable. And according to your own HOA rules, actions taken without a quorum or majority vote are invalid. Do you see where this is going?" Karen stammered. The smaller member looked like he might cry. And I swear, the neighbors who had been watching peeked out from behind curtains, leaning forward as if they were watching a movie unfold in real life. "You see," Dad continued, turning toward me with a faint smile, "rules are meant to protect communities, not terrorize them. And when someone tries to abuse those rules, consequences follow. Not from me, not from this family, but from the law, from logic, from fairness." For a moment, silence fell. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring and your heart thump painfully in your chest. Karen's face went from pale to red to pale again. I could see the gears turning in her mind, trying to find a way out, a way to save her dignity, a way to regain the illusion of control. But there was none. Then she snapped. She raised her hands and shouted something about fines, lawsuits, and revenge. And in that moment my dad smiled, the calm, knowing smile of someone who had already predicted her reaction. "You can threaten all you want," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "But threats don't make right, and they certainly don't make you smarter than someone willing to stand up with facts, patience, and integrity." I felt my chest tighten with pride. The road that had been my prison just hours ago was open. The barricade that had symbolized fear and intimidation was gone. And Karen and her clipboard army were left standing, defeated, humiliated, powerless. The suspense lingered a little longer as they shuffled away, murmuring under their breaths. But I knew this, we had won. Not through anger, not through violence, not through yelling, but through strategy, courage, and unshakable composure. I turned to my dad, heart pounding, eyes wide, and he gave me that faint smirk again. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the only way to deal with people who abuse authority is to outsmart them, and never ever let them think they can intimidate you." In that moment, I realized something important. We hadn't just cleared the road. We had set a precedent, a lesson, and more importantly, I had learned what true courage looked like. And as Karen stormed off, muttering threats we didn't need to worry about, I knew the story wasn't just over. It had reached its climax. The final part, the resolution, was just around the corner. The road was clear. The barricades were gone. The cones lay scattered like defeated soldiers across the pavement, and for the first time all morning I could breathe again. I stepped onto the street, looking at the wide-open path before me, and it hit me. This wasn't just about a blocked road anymore. It was about standing up for yourself, about patience, strategy, and courage. And it was about my dad, who had just taught me a lesson I would never forget. He leaned against my truck, that faint, confident smirk on his face. "Well," he said, hands in his pockets, "I'd say we made a statement." I laughed, the tension finally breaking in a rush of adrenaline and relief. "Statement? Dad, we made history." He chuckled, shaking his head. "History maybe, lesson definitely. Remember this, people like Karen? They thrive on fear and confusion. If you give them clarity, patience, and knowledge, they crumble. Every single time." I glanced back at the house across the street where I knew Karen was probably stewing, muttering about revenge and lawsuits. And I couldn't help but grin. She thought she had power. She thought she could intimidate me. But we had shown her the truth. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And intimidation isn't respect, it's weakness. I felt a strange mix of pride, relief, and disbelief wash over me. The suspense of the morning, the fear, the tension, the ridiculous absurdity of a barricade in front of my house was over. But it had left something behind, a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt before. My dad clapped me on the shoulder. "Come on," he said. "Let's go get some coffee. We've earned it." We walked down the road together, side by side, a father and child who had just survived an unexpected suburban war. The neighbors peeked out from behind fences and curtains, giving us nods, smiles, and a few whispers. Some laughed quietly. Some shook their heads in disbelief. And I knew they had all watched courage and strategy in action, and they'd learned something too. I turned to my dad as we reached the end of the street. "Do you think she'll try something again?" I asked, a little wary. He shrugged, that calm marine composure never leaving him. "Maybe, but now you know how to handle it. Calm, clear, strategic, and always remember, confidence backed by knowledge is unstoppable." As we drove away, I realized how surreal the morning had been. Just hours ago, I had felt trapped, powerless, even scared. And now the street was open, the barricade was gone, and my sense of control had returned tenfold. The HOA had tried to intimidate me, block me, and make me fear them. But all they did was show me how strong I could be, and how lucky I was to have a dad who knew exactly how to handle absurdity with precision and authority. We pulled into the local cafe, parked, and sat down with steaming cups of coffee. I watched the neighborhood from the window and felt a quiet satisfaction. The road was ours, the morning was ours, and the lesson, ours. "Dad," I said softly, "I don't think I'll ever look at an HOA the same way again." He smiled, that same faint smirk that had carried us through the chaos. "Good, that's the point. Life will throw ridiculous obstacles at you. People will try to intimidate you. But if you stay calm, think clearly, and use knowledge wisely, you'll come out on top." I nodded, taking it all in. And I knew he was right. This wasn't just a story about a blocked road or an overzealous HOA. It was a story about courage, patience, strategy, and the bond between a father and child. A story about standing your ground without losing your composure, about showing respect without accepting intimidation, and about knowing when to fight and how to fight. As we finished our coffee, I felt the adrenaline finally ebb, leaving a quiet, satisfying calm. The road ahead was open. The barricade was gone. And I realized something profound. The HOA may try again, rules may feel unfair, and people may act absurdly, but I had learned how to face it all. Calmly, strategically, courageously. And with my dad by my side, there was no challenge too ridiculous, no barricade too high, no HOA too overbearing. We had turned fear into power, chaos into clarity, and absurdity into a lesson we would never forget. The street was ours, the morning was ours, and for the first time in a long time I felt truly free. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.